welcome, Wiz. We've got Claude agent skills today. Skills seem like they are the next level of tools. Is that approximately right to you?
I couldn't have said it better myself, Greg.
Okay, all right. So we got meta tools. So now the tools have tools in them, and the tools also maybe have agents and workflows in them. And there's just a whole lot of agentic loops all the way down when we talk about skills. But in the end, they're super easy to implement, almost laughably easy, right?
Yeah, certainly when you're getting started, we'll look at an example of a skill you might create. But remember that we're only just getting started with skills. We're only just starting to explore this design space, and I think you're going to see it get rather complex, rather fast, in order to really take this to the next level.
Okay, so now we've gone from you got to select the right tool for the right job to now like we're going up a level, select the right agent with the right skills for the right job, something like this.
Selecting the right tool, selecting the right skills, either way, it's something useful.
Okay, so we're going to dig into skills. We're going to talk skills versus MCP versus tools. We're going to talk what's really going on under the hood of skills. It looks simple. Is it really simple? And you've got some skills demo ready that you're going to bring the skills on the demo with.
I'm going to show you guys that making skills is a piece of cake.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we're looking forward to your mad skills later, Wiz. Let's go ahead and kick this thing off. You ready to rock?
Let's go.
All right. All right, everybody. Welcome to another AI Makerspace Weekly Wednesday workshop event. Today we talk Claude agent skills, and this is the latest drop from Anthropic, and it piggybacks right on the name change from Claude Code SDK to Claude Agent SDK that we covered just a few weeks ago. This is something that is going to be part of the way you build agents in 2026. That's for sure. And this is really the next level. Let's take a look and see if we can put this into the proper context. If you stick with us today throughout the next hour, here's what you're going to learn. And don't forget, any questions, just drop them in the YouTube live chat or in the comments on your viewing platform. You're going to understand how Claude agent skills work and when you might think about using them today. Should you fully replace just simple tool and function calling? Should you fully replace MCP servers? Let's find out. Or should we use them as a complement to all of these things that are already in our toolkit and already part of the skill set that we have as developers and AI engineers? We're going to learn how the very simple implementation works, but then why it's so powerful, why it's so useful, and why it sort of addresses some of the key concerns that we've been talking about recently on this channel and that the entire industry has been talking about related to context engineering and doing it properly. We're going to discuss how Claude skills operates under the hood technically. There was a fantastic blog put out recently, First Principles Deep Dive, that we will really only scratch the surface of today, but we'll give you our technical experts' opinion on all things Claude skills versus tools versus MCP. And of course, we're going to build, ship, and share an agent with some skills. So we're going to break this down into a number of different components, from the release blog to exactly how we can think about the evolution from Claude Code to Claude Agent SDK, to thinking about tools versus MCP versus skills. And then we're going to build, ship, and share. So let's get into it with the top level. What's the news? What are they saying? Let's take a look. Skills are just folders. That's it. Let's call it a day. We can get out of here. They're just folders in our file system that include instructions, scripts, and resources. Kind of sounds a little MCP-ish already. And Claude can load them whenever Claude needs to load them. That's what Anthropic News top line said on October 16th. Now, the same day, Simon Willison put out his blog on it, and he basically breaks it down as skills are just markdown with a tiny bit of YAML metadata and some optional scripts in whatever you can make executable in the environment. Let's look at this. Markdown with a tiny bit of YAML metadata, like this. Markdown, overview, quick start, read a PDF. YAML front matter, name, PDF. Look, this is the PDF/skill.md. So we need to begin our skill readmes, apparently, with just some metadata, and then we articulate this thing in Markdown. Seems pretty straightforward so far. As skills grow in complexity, so as we move from the PDF skill to many different skills, or maybe build this entire app and tell me how long it took you and tell me how quickly the response time is on the app, becomes like one skill, we might have to move beyond this single README file. We might have to move beyond dumping everything into the context, we might say, of one MD file. In these cases, what we can do is we can bundle additional files within the directory, and we can just go get that info as needed. This kind of third, fourth, fifth, sixth level of additional detail, we can choose to navigate. So for instance, imagine you've got the skill front matter and the skill primary markdown. We can just actually add additional markdown files like this reference.md and like this forms.md. If you need to, let's say, fill out a PDF form. And so we can sort of start to think about nesting this additional content, nesting these additional resources, nesting this additional context that we might need to pull out later. And it's important to note, like, this nesting allows for this very important property of skills, that we're only going to access a skill and its relevant, let's say, sub skills or relevant tools or MCP servers that it's using when we need to, based on the problem we're solving. So while we work on tasks, Claude's going to scan the available skills, the sort of high-level skills, and then when it matches, we'll load only the minimal information. We won't leverage every single subcomponent of a skill. And this is going to allow us to keep Claude very, very fast, even though we need super specialized expertise. So this is sort of one example with a specific sequence. So to start here, we've got, you imagine this is the context window, and we want to be managing our context actively here. And so we've got the system prompt, and we've got some metadata for each of the skills: BigQuery, DocX, non-disclosure, review, PDF. And we want to be able to basically pick up different types of files. Okay, maybe we've got different, and you've probably seen this week, Claude, it can work with Excel. Yeah, this is not a surprise on the more consumer side and on the app side, but on the developer side, we might, of course, want to work with different types of files. And so we've got this kind of set of skills, and then we get this initial message from the user: fill out this PDF based on what you know about me. Here's the PDF. So Claude, yeah, certainly, I'll use the PDF skill to help. Oh, way to go, Claude. I don't need all the skills, just need the PDF skill. So it's feeling a lot like tools so far. The tool use kind of implementation here feels very much like a tool. I'm going to go get the skill. I'm going to get some sort of response based on this request to the skill. And then I'm going to actually follow the reference from the skill in that forms.md file. Remember this one right here, because that's the one I need relevant to the user's request. Okay, so kind of simple overall here. We can imagine how this kind of expands and nests all the way down. And of course, you can leverage skills like fill out form on a PDF. We can also, of course, execute code directly, and there's sort of Python file, very simple, straightforward ways to do this. Now, one of the things that's worth mentioning at this point is, and this is Simon Wilson's kind of note and interpretation. I've seen some pushback against skills as being so simple they're hardly a feature at all. Plenty of people have experimented with the trick of dropping extra instructions into markdown files and telling the coding agent to read that file before continuing with the task. Agents.md is a well-established pattern, and that file can already include instructions to read pdf.md before attempting to create a PDF. True. All of this is true. He goes on to say that the simplicity is, in fact, the point. They feel a lot closer to the spirit of LLMs. Throw in some text and let the model figure it out. They outsource the hard parts to the LLM harness and the associated environment. Or we could think about that as, the LLM's ability to quickly reason and decide what to do, and the file system. So let's think about how this piggybacks off of the Claude Agent SDK, which we covered about a month ago on this channel. Over the past several months, Claude Code has become far more than a coding tool. At Anthropic, we've been using it for all sorts of other things. In other words, the agent harness that powers Claude Code, the Claude Code SDK, can power many other types of agents too. To reflect this, we're renaming it from Claude Code SDK to Claude Agent SDK. Now, to dig more into that, check out our YouTube workshop on Claude Agent SDK. But the point here is that Simon notes in his blog that Claude Code is, with hindsight, poorly named. It's not purely a coding tool. It's a tool for general computer automation. Anything you can achieve by typing commands is something that can now be automated by Claude Code. It's best described as a general agent. Connecting this to skills makes this a whole lot more obvious and explicit than the simple renaming. And I think that's a great framing and way to enter this discussion before we dig too deep into the tech, which is now. Let's start digging into that. So skills versus model context protocol versus tools is worth kind of considering here. This is again from Simon. My own interest in MCPs has waned ever since I started taking coding agents seriously. Almost everything I might achieve with an MCP can be handled by a CLI tool instead. LLMs know how to call CLI tool --help, which means you don't have to spend many tokens describing how to use them. The model can figure it out later when it needs to. Skills have exactly the same advantage. Only now, I don't even need to implement a new CLI tool. I can just drop a markdown file in describing how to do a task instead, adding extra scripts only if they'll help make things more reliable or efficient, as we've seen. Markdown files. Dope. Over time, the limitations of MCP have started to emerge. Think about context optimization here. The most significant is in terms of token usage. GitHub's official MCP on its own famously consumes tens of thousands of tokens of context. And once you've added a few more to that, there's precious little space left for the LM to actually do useful work. So can we do it a better way? Can we manage the context window a better way? And exactly what we've discussed already, let's give it a name now. This is kind of from the Claude technical companion blog to the news article. They're calling this progressive disclosure. This is the core design principle that makes agent skills flexible and scalable. In other words, it allows agent systems to avoid extra long context so that performance starts to degrade and things start to rot. It allows us to do a better job thinking about how to manage context, even across many conversation turns as we're running this thing, because it's going to become very long, the context, just by using our agent. How can we start to think about ways to do this more intelligently? As we know, everything that makes agents good is this idea of context engineering, and context window management is a key component of this. So, concretely, like a well-organized manual that starts with a table of contents, then specific chapters, and finally detailed appendix, skills lets Claude load information only as needed, like the metadata in that YAML, less than 100 tokens. The body of the skill, just a couple thousand tokens maybe. Then we have this bundled set of extra stuff we might need, but we don't need unless we need. And so we start to extend our ability to leverage context without putting it all in context. Pretty dope. So, Wiz, first discussion. Before we like officially kind of introduce this, just off the bat here now, what's the right way to think about when I should be using skills versus tools versus MCP? Because I'm kind of imagining tools and MCP are somewhere in the potential context. It's not like a replacement straight up, but I don't know. Maybe it is.
Yeah, I think we fall into this trap a lot, right? When we're thinking about things that might have overlapping utility, where it's like these are all the same thing, and we should discuss them as if they're the same thing. But I really think we should separate the three, like tools, period, MCP, period, skills, period, right? Skills can leverage MCP and tools. MCP is used to help things understand what tools or resources you have available to help augment the context, right? Tools are just something that the LLM can do, basically. And we use tools to do a lot of these things. So when we have our skill, right, that says do something, well, we have to do something with a tool. We can't we can't do it with the skill. It doesn't make any sense, right? So I think it's the right way to think about them is to think about them as entirely separate concepts that can either leverage one or many of the others, right? So our skills can leverage our MCP servers, can leverage our tools. Our MCP servers help us discover tools and attach context to our LLM that it didn't have, when we turned the app on. And tools are just the way that we interface with everything, right? So they're without tools, we don't get MCP, or we get MCP in a very different form. We don't get skills, right? Certainly not in the form we see it today. So skills are like a new capability that you want really precise instructions for, versus tools, which is like, I need you to call this command line, and
Yeah.
once it can call a command line, it's like, I need you to call it 50 different ways. It's all good, right? I'm still calling the command line, which is
Yeah.
primarily the tool that things like Claude Code use.
And it's not even really that one is a higher level of abstraction than the other, because there's overlap, right? Like the tool use here, where we're using sort of invoking tool use to call the skill itself.
Yeah.
starts to have this kind of interesting kind of, it reminds me of the discussion is agents within context engineering, or is context engineering within agents? It's like,
That's
well,
right.
that's the wrong way to think about it.
That's right. Exactly so.
Okay. So
Yeah. At the end of the day, like, tools are the way our LLMs interact with the world, right? Or the environment. And skills are things we wish to do, given that we can interact with our environment, right? Uh, MCP is a protocol for adding model context, so it's in there as well, right? But what we say, what we mean in these conversations when we say MCP is we mean tools behind MCP. We're not actually talking about like the protocol, right? We're talking about one of the behaviors the protocol can enable, which is tool use, which is again, we're just talking about tools in that case. So it's just important to keep straight in our minds, like, that these are related but very separate concepts, and the right way to think about them is exactly that way.
yeah,
We don't want to
yeah,
get
and
lost in the sauce.
right, and the words that they've chosen for these concepts make it so easy to get lost in the sauce, except
Oh
maybe
yeah.
MCP. Um, but yeah, I mean, tools and skills are just meta ideas in and of themselves. And so we want to keep kind of tool calling and engaging with, some sort of request response thing very clear. Whereas the skill is this specific now construct where we're sort of nesting our ability to kind of do more complex, take tasks up to the level of problem solving, and to do it in a way that manages context according to best practices insofar as we can see them today. And then MCP is like, because Simon kind of makes it sound like, well, let's dispense with MCP a little bit in the blog there, and it's like, well, maybe, but also, yeah, maybe also there's room for all of this stuff in this emerging and expanding ecosystem that we live in.
Well, this is the point that Simon's making, right? Eventually, we'll get so good at tool use, we simply won't need MCP. We won't need a special protocol to specially translate how to use a tool or indicate how and when to use a tool. Like, I don't need MCP, right? When I'm looking to use a new CLI tool, I don't need to go to, you know, the the special learning brain protocol thing. I just look at the docs, right? Which is what we use as MCP in some fashion. I just read docs, and then I can use the tool. Well, we have docs, so at some point in the not too distant future, this whole MCP translation is just, well, just read the docs, right? Like, that's what the docs are there to describe for you. You read them, now you can use the tool just like a person would. We don't need this additional layer that we've kind of shoehorned in. And I think as well, what's important is that when Simon's discussing this, it's through that lens of computer use, right? The idea that the LLM is already good at using these CLI tools. It's not to say like the LLM is good at using every tool that exists ever,
Yeah.
but for this task or this kind of task, MCP is less and less useful as the models get better and better.
Yeah, and it's almost like we're building in the ability for us to accomplish these translations directly to the LLMs themselves as they become more powerful. And so it's like, the sort of Shoggoth is like engulfing the universe here a little bit around it
Yeah.
as necessary.
And something interesting, just to comment on the from the quote from Simon about the misnomer of Claude Code. I actually don't agree. I think that Claude Code was named exactly right, and Claude Code is simply grown, outside of it. Maybe one day they'll just call it, Claude Agent or whatever they're, I don't know, whatever
Yeah, yeah.
marketing thing they come up with. But I actually think it's it's still beautifully named. I mean, it can be used for anything, but as you're going to see with skills, part of what skills let us do is execute code, right? Which is a
Yeah.
very powerful pattern to be able to do. It's like when you were learning how to use your computer, when you were learning Python, right? You're like, oh, well, I have a problem. Python is my hammer, and I solve everything with it, right? I'm
Hmm.
just gonna write a little script for this. I'll write a little script for this. I'll write a little script for that. And this is still what Claude's using to achieve. So even if it no longer means Claude helps you make code, it now means Claude writes code to help you, right? Which is
Hmm.
still incredibly useful and incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
As
and even an MD file itself is not just free-form English. It
no,
has a specific code format,
yes,
right? As does obviously a YAML file. But yeah, it's interesting to think about how we're sort of often conflating, dispense with the idea that it's code, it's just English. Well, it's still code. Anybody who's ever tried to teach somebody new to update a README file, it won't update unless the syntax is right, and yeah,
it can be wrong.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's less flexible than language
Yeah,
generally.
yeah.
Okay, very cool. Let's keep it moving, Wiz. Thanks for the insights as always. We got a couple other discussions coming up here. So let's talk more about the technical details of this for a second, guys. This is from a First Principles deep dive by Han Lee that was put out just a couple of days ago this week. And this is a really kind of fun, super technical way that we can put a lens on this very simple Claude code thing or Claude agent skills thing. Claude's agent skills represents a sophisticated prompt-based meta tool architecture that extends LLM capabilities through specialized instruction injection. Oh, what do you think about that? Unlike trad function calling or codex, skills operate through prompt expansion and context modification to modify how Claude processes subsequent requests without writing executable code. Skills, in other words, are not executable code. They do not run Python or JavaScript, and there's no HTTP server or function calling happening behind the scenes. They are also not hard coded into Claude's system prompt. Skills live in a separate part of the API request structure. Skills are, in other words, specialized prompt templates. Huh. That inject domain specific instructions into the conversation context. Now we've got a new, this introduction of this idea of a new kind of split, at least introduction insofar as we've seen it on this channel. When a skill is invoked, it modifies both the conversation context by injecting instruction prompts and by the execution context by changing tool permissions and potentially switching the model. So we've got now two types of context here. Very interesting. But I want to just zoom out for a second as we think about this idea of just prompt templates here, Wiz. Are we just talking about prompt engineering at the end of the day here? Is that all we're really doing, or is it actually more appropriate here, given this kind of two types of context that we've introduced as well, that we really should be talking about this in terms of context engineering?
It's not prompt engineering, it's skill engineering, right? Because it's not a
Oh,
prompt, it's a skill. But I mean, in the sense that
skill
it's
engineering is being added for cohort 9 people. You heard
that's
it
right,
here
that's right.
first. Okay, 2026 skill
I mean,
engineering, the
listen,
hottest new skill.
it's I guess that the answer is like it certainly, like the way you format and the way you write the skills, the way
Yeah.
you write markdown files and sub markdown files has an impact on on how it operates. So of course it matters, right? We're in this world where hopefully at this point it's just like assumed that if you send something to the LLM, how you write it matters, right? And this is still true for skills. I do think that there's an interesting distinction you can make with including the words context engineering here, because of how skills are read by the LLM, right? Or in this case, how Claude makes the decision to include or not include, different layers of context from your skill, which means that, we can write skills in a way that they provide only the most minimal required context versus just kind of throwing the kitchen sink in. So there is a way to be more efficient with our tokens, with skills. There's a way to think about how to break them down so that we have only the tokens we need. And so, for that perspective, you can definitely say that it's context engineering. But of course, everything that goes in the model's context window is. So, it's not necessarily surprising.
Yeah, I mean, because at that point, I suppose, when we get too close to the context window itself, we kind of fall into this. Is it LLM engineering? Is it AI engineering? Are we talking about what we put in the LLM? Are we talking about what the application does? And then we're in this murky space. But I love skill engineering. Okay, I love that. Okay. So because it's somehow
There is better and
it's
worse
somehow more
skills, right?
specific, you
Yeah.
know. And then, okay, let's keep moving. We got a couple other things to cover and one or two more discussions to have before the demo. Thanks, Wiz. Skill engineering. It's now a thing on AI Makerspace. Okay, so instead of executing actions directly, skills expand into detailed prompts that prepare Claude to solve a specific type of problem. Each skill appears as a dynamic addition to the tool schema that Claude sees. And the way that this happens is Claude uses a declarative prompt-based system for skill discovery and invoking the skills. Now, quick note on terminology in the diagram you're about to see. And this is again from Han Lee. The capital S skill tool is the meta tool that manages all skills, whereas skills lowercase s, we're talking individual skills. Okay, so let's think about what happens when a user sends a request. Claude receives a message with three things: the user message, the available tools, and the capital S skill meta tool. The question is, does the capital S skill tool exist in the available tools? And, if we've set up our skills, then it should. But the skill tools description contains a formatted list of every available tool with their name, description, and all other fields that they need. So Claude's going to read this, and it's going to use its native language understanding to match the user intent against the description of all available tools. And if the answer is no, we don't have the skill tool, we're just going to use other tools. But if we have the meta skill tool, which assume we do because we're doing skills, Claude reads the skill tool and then the skill tool descriptions so as to decide what to do next. Okay, so the skill tool is the one that manages individual schools, individual skills, skill tools, schools. Not in the system prompt. That's not where it is. It's sort of a layer down. Now, what happens next is we want to select a skill. And the skill selection mechanism has no specific algorithmic routing or intent classification. In fact, it's using the LLM directly. It's using Claude directly to do the reasoning as to figuring out which skill. Now, this is quite interesting because let's again talk about what's not happening, which gives us a little more insight. There's no algorithmic routing, no intent classification, no embeddings, classifiers, no pattern matching. The system instead formats all available skills into a text description and lets Claude's language model make the decision. This is pure LLM reasoning, no regex, no keyword matching, no ML-based intent classification. It happens inside Claude's forward pass through the transformer, not in application code. So, Wiz, I wonder, like, when we think about how LLMs are being trained to be better at tool calling and better at agentic reasoning today, is this part of the thing that has enabled our ability to work with skills directly like this? Has this been available all along? This idea of LLMs out of the box, even though they're not reasoning, are good at reasoning.
I don't think so. No, like so, skills are. Uh, it's just like everything else. The issue, right? So, I mean, because we've got better at tool calling, certainly, instruction following, you betcha. But the
Mm.
actual reasoning component is only useful if we have to make very complex decisions or we have to think for a long time about which skill we should use or
Mm.
which sub skill we should use. But hopefully, we're designing our systems in ways where that's not as a big of an issue. Now, is it true that you know reasoning can help us if there is like I could either use skill A or B, and I'm kind of on the edge. Sure, reasoning might be the differentiator there, but it's more of a broad capability enhancement that's got us loving it for skills,
Mm.
and as well like this
Instruction flow.
idea
Yeah.
of like having the layered approach, right? So the LLM sees the top layer and makes a determination about whether to go deeper or not. Like that is something that is just an engineering pattern that is particularly useful that we've come up with, which I think is in large part why skills are to me so exciting, right? It's you can really see like the logical extreme of this is going to be quite complex, but really well managed in terms of how much we're polluting the context window.
Okay. Okay. All right. So it's not, unless it, like everything else, requires reasoning. It's not really reasoning that's the secret sauce here. But I do love the call out of tool calling getting better. Definitely helps us call the right skill. Instruction following getting better definitely helps us pick up the right instructions to follow within the
Famously,
skill. Yeah, yeah, it makes a lot of intuitive sense here. Okay, so I'd like to, I guess, just stay with you for a second here, as we sort of walk through this second piece of the flow, where okay, we decide we want to get a skill, we want to invoke the skill, want to validate that it exists, check perms, load the skill, execute the skill, return results to the conversation, and so we're essentially prompt injecting. We're sort of instruction injecting. It almost reminds me of the contextual retrieval stuff they were working on. We're just sort of enhancing context appropriately here. Okay,
that's right.
so and so they call out, it's fundamentally different from traditional tools, in that we're just prepping the context,
Yep.
and we're not calling the thing. Um,
Not straight away, no.
so does that mean we're just not hitting an LLM?
No, we definitely are, right? So, but the idea is that we're instead of a tool, right, which has got a very kind of like obvious in out, which is like instruction to invoke tool,
Right.
response from tool, right? Very, very, very straightforward. The skill lets us kind of have an intermediate step, right? Which is
Mm.
like we're not directly calling the tool. It's like, okay, you want to do this skill? Well, here are the things that I can do. Here are the things that information I have access to. Here's some background context on it, right? And then I can do things like, boom, let's go to the next step, or let's now call a tool. Now that I have more context, I know what tool that I should be able to call. And the idea of skills is that they allow us to dynamically add uh, pre-generated context, right? It sounds an awful lot like the systems we've used before because it is, right? It's very like RAG coded. It's very much in a similar vein as any kind of context augmentation. Because it is. That's what it's doing. It's saying, like, if I ask you, hey, Greg, I want to know how to make a pizza, and you just start, and then you make me a pizza and you give it back, like that's a tool, right? And now I have pizza. If I ask you, hey, Greg, how do you make a pizza? Then you say
PB and J, I'll go. Yeah.
And then you say, you know what? I have a recipe. Here's the recipe on how to make pizza. And then I can say, oh, sweet. Okay, can you make me the dough? Can you make sure that it's the right consistency? So you've given me this context that I can now use to inform a better plan or use to inform better sequencing of my actions.
Yeah.
But we've written that, we've pre-canned that skill, right? We've ahead of time thought and developed the skill as opposed to just the tool.
Yeah. Yeah, as opposed to, right, here's a knife, here's how to open the drawer, here's the peanut butter, here's how to twist off the cap, here's where it sits here. And so this sort of, I included this kind of line from this second wave of MCP by Vercel recently, we've been chatting about in class, which is like, we want our apps to be able to handle complete user intentions, whatever it is that we're leveraging within the apps, tools, MCP skills, all of the above is more useful than providing, hey, here's a bunch of tools, go figure it out. Here's the, as you mentioned, the recipe, the cookbook. Here is the sort of, as they mentioned in the release blog, that they sort of said this they're doing it through progressive disclosure, but it's like a well-organized manual, right? And so it's this recipe, this specific way of solving this specific problem. Okay, so before you show us how this works under the hood, I just want to zoom in on one last point, which is these two types of context that I'm not clear and square on yet. This idea that we can modify execution context, and we also have conversation context, and so it's a little bit different, I guess, than the original question I wanted to ask. But how should we think about execution context versus conversation context? I think this is the piece that we want to end on before we head to the demo.
Yeah, in my view, this is largely a cosmetic distinction, but the idea is, it doesn't have to be, right? So it can be more explicit. But the idea is we can execute, or we can change execution context as in like a configuration, right, of what can do what. Like as in we can only use like the git tool, and we can only use it to read repositories. We can't push repositories. And we're going to use Sonnet 4.5 instead of Claude Opus 4.1, right? These are like execution contexts. So this is literally like the environment that we're executing in, right? If we were to analogize this to our new method of thinking about prompts, this is like system prompt level information, right? Where we are, what we have access to, what the model's literally called, versus conversation context, which is like instructions, literally like classic context, so like pieces of information, information about where files are, information on what we've done recently, right? Things that are unique to not our environment, not where we're executing lines of code or executing calls or what model we're going to or things like that, but instead just what's the environment of our conversation right now? How many turns have we had? How many times have you talked about apples, right? Like these kinds of things are conversation context, and this is much more familiar to us, right? Execution context is like not typically something that we've thought of managing during the workflow, right? We're not now use 4.1. We're like, and then this step uses 4.1. You know what I mean? Versus now, yeah.
Well, I want to say it's like within versus before the session starts. Conversation, conversation context is within the session, and execution context is, the dev environment, libraries, and branch development processes, and we're sort of the boundaries of our environment. But now, as we get into this kind of meta tool layer, the execution context can be modified and changed during the session. And so it's kind of a cool, you can't pre-can the rules of the game, only the options based on the skills and the user intent,
That's right.
It depends, classic, right?
We're right back to it depends world. We never left. That's our secret.
That's right. Okay. Well, with that, Wiz, I think it's time to hand it over to you. We've got some Claude agent skills coming at you. We're going to build a skilled agent here, and we're going to see what Claude agent skills looks like under the hood, guys. Buckle up. It's demo time with the Wiz. Over to you.
All right, it's time for demo. We're going to demo. The easiest way to show this is as follows. Let me share my screen. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop into my boy Claude. Actually, before I pop into my boy Claude, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what we have in this directory. We've got a bunch of stuff, but most importantly, we have this cake.jpg. Now, you're going to have to take my word for it because I'll have to reshare my screen. It's worth it. I'm going to reshare my screen so we can look at a picture of this this piece of cake. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up in my Finder, and then we're going to share that screen because this is, you got to trust me that it's a cake. It's a particular looking cake, okay? So this is a cake that's been designed to look like it's upside down. Now, I don't know about you, but this looks weird. It looks wrong, right? So what I want to do is I want to flip it. I want to flip this image. Now, I could, of course, write Python to do this, or I could use my image manipulation skill that I've built in Claude to do this for me. So let's go back to the old terminal and see what that skill looks like. Okay, boom. So in my directory, I have everything you'd expect. I also have this little .claude, right? So let's look and see what's in that .claude. And in that .claude, you can see we have some skills. Okay, we love it. Let's go into our skills. In those skills, you see we have image manipulation. You know what's going to happen. We go into image manipulation. Let's see what we have in here. We've got a virtual environment. We've got the skill MD. We've got some image tools.py and then some UV, boilerplate. So let's look at our skill .md. You can see that what we have is we have this little bit, right? This triple dash delimited area, which is just going to be a little bit of YAML. And this YAML is just the name and description of our skill. Now, every time we use our agent, we're going to see this particular YAML file at the top of our markdown file, right? So every time we do a call, we're going to see this. We're going to see that we have access to this skill. And you can see the skill is very simple. It says it's going to use pillow to rotate, crop, zoom, apply filters, adjust. Basically, it's just going to do stuff that pillow can do. And what I've done actually is I have created a script that does this. Now let's read through the rest of our skill.md. The rest of this information is only passed when the LLM determines that it should use this skill to do the following tasks. So you can see here we have our image manipulation skill, which functions for the image tools script. We can rotate, crop, resize, zoom, apply filters, adjust colors, flip and mirror, and convert formats. And we have some instructions, right? It shows how we can use this particular script, right? So this isn't a tool, but we have instructions on how you can execute part of the bundle of files that comes with our skill, right? This is important because without this, we don't know how to use part of our bundle of files. We're just kind of guessing at it. And now Claude can do a good job, but it's better to be, more explicit. So we have understand the request, check the input, execute operations with a sample command, and then show results, and offer next steps. And then we have a bunch of usage examples, right? So this is classic few shot. Then we have a bunch of notes, and these notes are going to be basically how we determine how to use this tool a little bit more fine-grained. But the idea is that this is just a big instruction file for what this skill can do. Now, in this case, the skill is very much tied to the idea of that there's a Python file that it's going to run, right? But beyond just a tool, this is giving more comprehensive detail about what exactly we can do with this. And it doesn't have to be set up as a tool. And in fact, it doesn't have to include any code at all, right? It can be some PDFs that we link out to, or it could be some instruction manuals that we link out to, or it could be some sub markdown folders that we link out to. But for us, just to keep it nice and straightforward, it's a bit of code. So let's look at that code now. And we can see that in our image tools.py. Very, very standard. We have a bunch of functions. These functions do things. We can apply filters, we can adjust the image, we can flip the image, we can convert the image, we can get info, we can, and then we have our main, right, which is going to be our parser. So this is going to be like a CLI tool that we build. And this is the kind of thing that, Simon Willison was talking about, which is basically, right, we can just build this CLI tool, and then the CLI tool is going to be what lets us do all of this work, right? So instead of having to build a tool to understand our CLI tool, we just build a CLI tool and make it a skill. That's how it is. Next, we want to see this thing in action. So we've seen, okay, so there's a Python script, there's a skill.md. So let's see this thing actually do something. So we're going to go back to our Claude skills directory. We're going to go back to Claude, and we're going to say, hey, could you please flip the cake picture 180 degrees, vertically, so it doesn't look upside down. When you send this off, we see that Claude is now enchanting. We can see that the image manipulation skill is now running. This is important because this is in a sub environment. The sub environment is the, you can think of it as like an execution environment. So it's separate to the rest of our thread. This is really important because it helps keep context to its little box, right? The idea is with our skill, like, we don't necessarily need all of the context for what happened in our skill to be polluting the main context window, right? This is a good part of context engineering. Instead, what we want to have that be represented only in this part of the conversation, which is when our skill is being utilized, right? We could have a lot of tokens of instruction in our skill that we simply don't want the main conversation thread to be polluted by. And so this is an important piece of the skill puzzle. Okay, let's go back here, and what we're going to do is we're going to exit Claude, and we're going to see if it did the job right. We can see that we have this new cake flipped.jpg. So we're going to go ahead and open our cake flipped.jpg. And you guys can't see it yet, but I can see it, and I can tell you this is looking a lot more natural to me, right? This is how a wedding cake should look. Now, of course, this was constructed to be upside down, so this is wrong technically, but I like it more because it looks like a regular wedding cake. And thanks, Claude. But the idea is that, you can just, instead of making a tool or needing to add an MCP server, you can make a skill. You can add all the functionality in a nice little self-contained bundle that doesn't touch the rest of anything else, right? And this is a very simple skill. You can imagine building more complex skills. You can imagine building skills that reference other skills, that reference many different tools, that reference MCP servers. You can imagine skills that help you build skills better. Or you can imagine a skill that helps you build skills on the fly that then you could use later on, building a library of Claude built skills that helps Claude get better and better. So we're just starting to understand the work we can do with skills. But for me, I think it's an excellent unlock. It's a much easier way to think about things than it is like than we have been thinking about them like with tools or these MCP servers, which come with all this technical baggage. Skills are very understandable by folks technical and non-technical. It's basically just a bundle of resources to make your agent better at something that you want it to be better at, that you can define ahead of time. And that is our demo. And with that, I'll pass you back to Dr. Greg. But before I do, I got to ask you to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell notification. We are here on Wednesdays, so come on down. Rain, shine, dogs roaming in the background or not, we're here. So
Are those real dogs, Wiz, or are those robot dogs? What's going on?
It's half and half. There's some robots, some real.
Okay. Thanks, Wiz. Let's wrap up, and we've got maybe time for a couple questions here as well. So we covered skills today, and we're talking about, they are a little bit different than things like tools, like MCP, and we want to consider them as different patterns for different things today. Maybe there's a future without MCP. I don't know. But for today, MCP, tools, skills, these are things that employers are going to be asking about. These are things enterprises are going to be asking about. These are things that we expect. Certainly MCP and tools are being asked about on a regular basis here at AI Makerspace. I expect skills to be next. It definitely falls on the back of this Claude Code SDK to Agent SDK name change. We said we sort of had entered the meta zone, and we see this next level of kind of meta tools happening with skills. They're just folders, right? They're just Markdown. They're just YAML, but they're this selective kind of smart context engineering. And you heard it here first, guys. Skill engineering, the hottest new skill in AI is skill engineering. How meta is that? So if you do have questions, please throw them into the chat. We do have a couple we wanted to answer. So Wiz, let's go ahead and bang these out before we close out today. We've got, first of all, Arnab asks, the sub environments, do they have different dependencies? Is this part of this execution context?
They can have different dependencies, yes. So you can define the dependencies in the skill.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So maintain your execution context. All right. And be a execution context engineer. Maybe that's the new job title, 2026. Here we go. SciTalk TV asks, how easily could Claude agent skills be ported over to and used in the cursor code? In the cursor code CLI cursors, or in cursor, basically. I mean, can we set up cursor ahead of time to be more useful to skills, or is this a Claude only thing right now?
Right now, it's just Claude that's doing this. So I imagine Cursor will adopt it soon, and they have some kind of similar things, but exactly the way that Claude set it up, that only exists for the Thropic.
Yeah. Okay. The Thropsters are the ones, and so maybe if you put Claude Code inside of Cursor, you can get a little bit more skills. We'll see. Well, stay tuned. Stay tuned, guys. Manny asks, have they open sourced this? Is this fully open source? Is this a thing that we can get source code access to?
Nope.
Easy. Okay. Easy. And then there was a cool question earlier from I think it was from Paul, but it was about the Claude Skills store. Do we expect to see kind of, we're kind of talking about this last night in class a little bit. Do we expect to see sort of a skills store or like an agent store, or are they the same thing in the future? Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to answer the question without knowing the future, but I would say, we do expect to see that skills are something that can be shared, and if something can be shared and is useful, then I think we all know that after that is money. So
That's right. That's right. Cash, baby. Sweet, sweet
yeah,
cash. Okay. All right. So, yeah, stay tuned to stores in which you can buy the skills. Maybe they'll be coming soon. But actually, I
that's
believe
right.
there's a store called AI Makerspace where you can buy skills if you're willing to put some skin in the game and go earn them. Wiz,
I
thanks
heard
for
that.
on that note. It's time to wrap. Thanks for your expertise as always, Wiz. Enjoy the conf this week, and we'll see you soon.
Hell yeah.
All right. And we are time to wrap. Thanks, everybody, for joining another AI Makerspace Weekly Wednesday workshop event. As you know, we are on a mission to create the world's leading community for people like you who want to build, ship, and share production LLM applications. If you are trying to find a cool, competent community to be a part of, we'd love to have you jump into Discord today and start building, shipping, and sharing with us. And we do also want to announce that for all of you, some of our favorite community members that stick around to the very end of events, we do have a brand new course coming up that is launching next Monday. So before we meet again on YouTube, called the AI Engineering On-Ramp. And I'd love to offer this kind of $100 off the $500 Get Started On-Ramp into AI Engineering course. If you know anybody in your network that would like to start learning these developer skills with Cursor, not with Claude skills yet, and how to get started down the path, do please refer them, because you definitely know the kind of people that are right for this kind of work, and maybe they can achieve that 150, 200K a year job in 2026. Any cash spent towards the AI Engineer On-Ramp can be directly applied to AI Engineering Bootcamp courses in 2026. We are excited for AI 9. We'll dig deep into skills at that time, I'm sure. And with that, thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Same time, same place. Here on YouTube, we have been Dr. Greg, the Wiz, and Jacobs in the background, AI Makerspace. Shout out to Laura in the chat. We'll see you next week, guys. It's been a pleasure. Until next time, keep building, shipping, and sharing. We'll do the same. Peace.